I want to get to this final set of stories, and I think they're connected in a really interesting way. Uh, in the UK over the weekend, UK Uncut, which is kind of the forerunner actually of Occupy Wall Street, UK Uncut began after the election in 2010 of the current UK government, which is a Tory Liberal Democrat coalition, which has gone on a brutal austerity spree. And of course, they've been ground zero. The economy hasn't recovered. It's gone into negative growth. Uh, they want tax cuts. They want brutal regressive spending, and they're letting corporations get away with tax avoidance. And this protest against HSBC, where the UK Uncut group shut down 13 branches of HSBC across the UK this past weekend in Glasgow, Sheffield, Brixton, and Regent Street in London, among other branches. They temporarily shut down the banks, and they opened up food banks out front in their place as a protest against the HSBC's systemic tax avoidance in Europe, which has been condoned by the right wing government in the UK. And obviously, these types of tax policies were also condoned by the Labour government that preceded it. This is very much a bipartisan problem in the UK, just like it is in the United States. And they this was a significant public accomplishment. It brought UK Uncut back onto the radar, and it brought some accountability to HSBC, which, as we all know, in addition to being world-class tax avoiders, they're also the preferred to drug money launderers and terrorist money launderers for global terrorist and drug cartels. And it's connected, obviously. That protest is connected, if not directly, but it's connected through ideas and through policies and through implications to the bankruptcy of Detroit. And it's connected to what Steve was talking about, which is the hollowing out of most of the country. And it's connected to skyrocketing student loan rates. And it's connected to the slashes in housing and services in the UK without reining in the financial sector there, which also led to their economic implosion. And this is so in all of these areas, we're seeing the starving of revenues, the systemic avoidance of taxes, and the systemic avoidance of really corporate accountability and a run-amok financial sector. So David Atkins, writing for Digby, highlighted that the G20, in at least what is a positive move on an idea level, is agreeing to get serious about coordinating on tax avoidance. They're meeting G20 ministers to try to come up with a coordinated strategy to rein in systemic and massive tax avoidance. And we all know Apple's use of incredibly elaborate schemes to avoid paying many taxes in the United States. Another example from the UK, Starbucks last year paid no single corporate tax in the United Kingdom, despite generating nearly $630 million in revenue. So this is the type of thing that we're seeing across the board. But as Atkins points out, this coordination is grossly inadequate. It's a step in the right direction, but the problem is that there's no teeth in it. And there needs to be codified, built-in global rules on these types of things. We talk about the way a terrible trade agreement like TPP will codify lower worker, environmental, and regressive intellectual property rights standards. Well, the problem is not global codification of standards per se. The problem is global codification of standards that only benefit a small group of corporate special interests, which we already know have way too much power over the policy-making process. And that's why these aren't even genuine trade deals. They're just preferential agreements for capital to flow more easily through countries and exploit various loopholes. And what Atkins says, and what I totally agree with, is that tax avoidance needs to be punishable in the same way as harboring terrorists. It needs to be punishable in the same way as some countries have been punished, like Colombia was in the 90s, for really directly aiding certain drug cartels. This issue is the paramount issue of how we fund what we need to fund into the future, how we keep modern government existing and functioning, and society and the economy growing. And every time you see one of these ridiculous conversations of these people, sitting around talking about nibbling at the edges of people's retirements, decimating the social safety net, and why we need more accountability and more of this and more of that for people who are out there struggling to make a living, create opportunities for their families, survive, and God forbid, even thrive in the modern economy. Remember this. Remember the massive coordination of tax avoidance across countries, across sectors, tech, finance, oil, all of the rest. It's a good step that they're actually talking about it, but this needs to have serious teeth, because this is arguably the preeminent issue of the age. So when you hear about TPP, fight against that, and then tell your rep, not only don't I want TPP, I want, we don't even talk about a trade agreement until there is a global binding rules on tax avoidance and tax shelters. So we need to get serious about this, and these are some good initial steps, possibly, but they need real teeth. And congratulations to UK Uncut for what they did with the HSBC offices over the weekend. That's great. And, there was actually this one moment, and we're going to switch in just a second, but there was this great anecdote during one of the first protests that UK Uncut did. And I'm using this again because this was sort of the forerunner in some ways of Occupy. And obviously, in Spain, Greece, there's a lot of movements. But in the UK Uncut, when the conservative government got into power, they forgave a massive tax bill that a phone company, whose name I'm forgetting, phone carrier in the UK was avoiding through. They based some office in Belgium, basically, and they were routing. They were using Belgium to avoid a massive UK tax bill. To make a long story short, and these UK Uncut protesters were outside protesting it. And this cop began talking with some of the protesters. And obviously we have a lot of terrible stories of, how the police were used against Occupy Wall Street and all the rest. But in this case, the cop was actually listening to the protester. He's like, what do you got? What's the problem? Why are you guys out here? I think it was Vodafone. I'm not sure. Why are you guys protesting? And the protesters simply explained, look, the equivalent of this tax bill, which is being forgiven, is the equivalent of this amount of like a housing allowance, which is being cut, which is going to make this many people lose their homes. And the cop said, wait a second, because he connected it with his own job, which is what you should. He said, wait a second, I might lose my job or my retirement because this company can't pay its dues, even though they're at record profits. And that's exactly the point. So I think just those connections of the most very simple dots wherever they can happen is really vitally important.